Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kadi Salah, and I'm the Director for Africa and the Middle East at Myriad USA. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar titled How Proximate and African Diaspora-Led Funds Are Transforming Global Philanthropy. For those of you who aren't familiar with our work, Myriad USA is a public charity based in New York City. We're dedicated to helping US donors, including individuals, families, corporations, as well as advisors to philanthropists, support international causes anywhere around the world. We also partner with nonprofit organizations globally, providing them with solutions like our American Friends Fund to receive tax-deductible gifts from donors in the United States. Last year, we facilitated $169 million in grants across 90 countries. We are incredibly proud of the impact our partners are creating, and we look forward to expanding our reach this year. Today's discussion is part of our ongoing International Giving Seminar series, and it focuses on the powerful shift happening in global philanthropy. In this discussion, we'll explore how funds led by those with deep underground expertise, the very people they serve, are pioneering a more effective and equitable giving model. But before we dive in, please allow me to provide a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is in listen-only mode, and the chat function is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. We've set aside time at the end to answer as many questions as we can live, and my colleagues will also be responding directly in the Q&A box. If we're not able to answer all the questions, please feel free to add your name so we can follow up. Translation is also available through closed captioning. Click the Show Captions button at the Controls toolbar and select your preferred language. A recording of this session would also be sent to all the registered participants. We have a fantastic discussion ahead, so let us get started. Before I start bringing in our panelists to share their insights and expertise with us, allow me to provide a couple of contexts for today's discussion. Investment in local leadership and solutions are needed now more than ever in light of the retreat of global north from international development. Alternative funding models, such as those driven by the diasporas and collaborative efforts, are also becoming necessary. Myriad USA is working to address these challenges through partnerships with organizations like the African Diaspora Network and ADESO. This year, we launched 2 funds to amplify innovations in global philanthropy in close collaboration with these 2 organizations. The first one, the African Diaspora Innovation Fund, launched in collaboration with the African Diaspora Network, otherwise known as ADN, aims to bridge the gap between remittances and long-term investment. The African Diaspora Innovation Fund goal is to transform the generosity of the diaspora into scalable, sustainable impact in Africa and its global diaspora. The Proximate Fund, the second one, was launched in collaboration with ADESO. The fund aims to nurture and build a thriving network of local investments across Africa and support African civil society and social entrepreneurs who are best equipped to create an effective solution for local development. I am honored to introduce the 2 visionary leaders behind these innovations, Almaz Negash and Degen Ali. Almaz is a global leader in social innovation and was a member of President Biden's Advisory Council on African Diaspora Engagement. She's the founder and CEO of the African Diaspora Network, a platform that activates the intellectual, philanthropic, and entrepreneurial power of the African diaspora. Under her leadership, ADN has launched several flagship programs, including the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, Builders of Africa's Future, Accelerating Business Leadership and Entrepreneurship, and the African Scientific Community Engagement. Almaz is spearheading the African Diaspora Innovation Fund, as I mentioned earlier, in collaboration with Myriad USA, in order to align her work and advocacy to move the diaspora beyond remittances and drive sustainable investments in Africa and its global diaspora through philanthropy. She's been recognized as one of Silicon Valley's 100 women of influence and one of the 50 leading African corporate women. She also serves on multiple boards and has served as an executive in residence at San Jose State University. Almaz is also one of the founding board members of the Black Corporate Board Readiness BCBR program at Santa Clara University. Dagan Ali, also a global thought leader, is the executive director of ADESO. Dagan has been at the forefront of a movement to create a more just and effective international development system. Her work focuses on breaking down barriers to locally led development by ensuring that communities in the Global South have the power and resources to determine their own destinies. Dagan pioneered the first large-scale cash transfer in Somalia in 2003. Her advocacy for shifting humanitarian funds to local actors helped spur the Grand Bargain commitment to direct 25% of funds to local actors at the 2016 World Humanitarian Summit. Dagan is also the co-founder of the Network for Empowered Aid Response called NEAR Network, the first Global South civil society network for local and national humanitarian organizations. She has been featured in the New York Times, Al Jazeera, and The Guardian, and much more. Dagan was named as one of the most influential African women in 2023 by Avance Media and Nonprofit Leader of the Year by the Anthem Awards in 2024. She's a Rockefeller Foundation Global Fellow for Social Innovation and a contributor to the Overseas Development Institute, Humanitarian Policy Group, and Global Food Security Journal. Dagan lives in Kenya and brings together organizations and philanthropists worldwide in the global effort to decolonize aid and philanthropy. The Proximate Fund, launched this year as mentioned, is simply a natural progression of Dagan's vision of a decolonized philanthropy. Before we dive into the conversation, allow me to provide a few context about why this conversation is happening. As I mentioned before, these two visionary leaders have been working for decades in ensuring that innovative tools are provided both from a diaspora perspective, but as well as a continental perspective to drive locally led solutions. So both the African Diaspora Innovation Fund and the Proximate Fund have been years in the making. However, they were launched this year at the moment when global international development is in the phase of reckoning and is frankly unraveling. So I'm going to call on Almaz to share the diaspora perspective before we move to the continental one from Dagan. Almaz, please come in and tell us to help us understand how you saw this coming from ADN's perspective and all the work you've done at ADN. How did you see this movement coming, and where do you see us moving forward from here? Thank you and welcome.
Patty, thank you so much. So wonderful to partner with you and be with Dagan on this wonderful convening. So we can at least tell our story as a family, as a community member, as a global diaspora. And thank you to Mariana and Habi for putting this together. And I appreciate Myriad. In all transparency, Myriad and ADN, we have been working together for so many years. And honestly, I am not very objective. I love that foundation, just simply because you really understood early on about what the role of the diaspora is when we talk about philanthropy. So I've been in this space for 15 years now, at least it was ADN, has been, it's 15 years old. We started with this imagination and thinking and idea that, you know, the continent is part of us wherever we go. You leave your country and you pretty much are connected to the continent. And so what I was missing from the conversation, at least in Silicon Valley, I had the privilege, you know, it's not for everyone. It's just really, to be very honest, you can have an idea, but unless you have an ecosystem where you can really make this a reality, it doesn't always happen. So I've always realized that there is a huge role for the diaspora to play when it comes to the continent. It not only financially, but also intellectually, this amazing mentorship, skills transfer, skills sharing, knowledge exchange. All of this is already available to us. The problem was that we were not organized. And that was the whole idea of creating a network of diasporans and Friends of Africa from around the world where we can really come together and co-create possibilities. To bring us back to what I saw over the years and how we got to be where we are, is that actually it's interesting. When we started the other programs, everybody can take a look at it, and then happy to respond. But I think what I want to talk about is how we got into the Beyond Remittances movement at ADN. This was not in a vacuum. So in 2020, to the people that were invited to speak at the African Diaspora Investment Symposium, as a host, I actually made it a mess because I kind of challenged the premise. Why is it that we always talk about sending remittance to the continent, which is fine, but it is not enough? Remittances is very transactional. It is me to my family. It doesn't scale. It's extremely difficult to see investment happening. And so instead of making our families, our friends, and our sisters, and our community dependent on remittances, what is it that we're going to do to actually create a cohesive ecosystem where they can thrive? Meaning that, can we go a little bit beyond the remittances and start to invest in our community? That was an interesting conversation that started in 2020. 2022, you can see how the progression, because nothing really comes in a vacuum. In 2022, we really worked it through and thought about the creating the the Beyond Remittances campaign. We launched the Beyond Remittances campaign at the Africa Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C. That was really amazing, and it was in partnership with the State Department, actually, just to for all the transparency. We really did this together. It was one of the realization, as you know, Kadi, that the diaspora can actually tap into our own savings or other fundings that we have. Not all of us, but a lot of us can do this to give back to the continent that can be invested, or to the individuals. In the case of ADN, it's to the entrepreneurs that we're serving. Well, it took us another year, a year and a half, Kadi, to have the conversation with you and John Paul to really think through what would this look like if we were going to create a fund. And we come this far to say that back and forth and the support of our board has really said, yeah, we should really create a fund that we can, for at least 3 years, start to give out the $25,000 for each of the entrepreneurs that ADN serves under the Builders of Africa's Future. These are grassroots African entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs. And then the Accelerating Business Leadership and Entrepreneurship. These are diasporans, African Americans, and Afro-Caribbeans in the United States. Access to funding to our people, no matter where we are, is the hardest one. Just so you know, I am here in Silicon Valley. Less than 3% of Black entrepreneurs get access to venture funding or any other funding, to be frank, and then less than 1% is for women. So we have a long way to go. So what we are trying to do with this fund is really, we also turned this upside down. We didn't go, and this is still the same, but we don't mind if we get a big institution to give us the funding. We didn't go straight to a big institution to give us the seed funding when we launched the African Diaspora Innovation Fund. We actually said, we're going to start this on our own. And Kadi, myself, and a bunch of us, we said we will contribute. That's how we started it, and we launched it in May. And the last thing I want to mention, this so that the audience understand, is the timing could not have been better, but we still have a long way to go. ADN, the Builders of Africa's Future at ADN, used to get $25,000 each at the end of their when they complete the program from the U.S. African Development Foundation, and that is not available anymore. So we didn't anticipate this, as you remember, Patty. But it's interesting that it ended up being actually very, very helpful. And so our goal right now is, how do we work hard, all of us, and contribute? We cannot just talk our way out. I'm sorry to say this. We got to really put our money where our mouth is. We really need to step up and do this. So my plea to everyone who's in this webinar is, take a look at what we're doing, what Digan with her organization, Proximate Fund, are doing, and find out where you feel you are more compelled to give or to share, and then do something, because otherwise I think we're going to go back and have this conversation. So I do hope it answered your question. So there was no necessarily big insight, except that our bets on each other and the diaspora, and I continue to believe in us. So thank you for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you for setting the stage from a global diaspora perspective, Almaz. And I think it's a nice segue to turn to Dagan, who, as many know, has been really advocating for sustainability and centering proximate leadership, locally led solutions in funding decisions, both across the continent, but also in the global north. USAID, international development, including in Europe, is unraveling. Dagan, you've been seeing this coming for a very long time. Tell us how what you saw coming. What were some of those patterns that you felt were unsustainable? And so you kind of structured your advocacy on equitable giving. And where do you see us moving from here going forward? Thank you.
Thank you, Kadi. Thank you, Myriad. It's an honor to be here and share the stage with Almaz. And the work of ADN is amazing. When I went to their first conference, was it last year or the year before? I was just completely wowed. She's turned an idea into action very quickly. She's an action-oriented human being, which I love. Yeah, I mean, so we have been talking about the importance of supporting locally led organizations and proximate leaders for a long time. I hope for many of us, this is not a new issue, and I hope we understand the value addition in the ecosystem that local groups have. We know that they are doing 80–90% of the work on the ground in terms of basic service delivery. We know that they're the ones risking their lives every single day. We know that they understand the context, and giving money to them is actually much more impactful in terms of at the community level. And usually they're the ones who design programs that are the most appropriate. Whereas right now, the system is top heavy, and programs and projects are already driven by Global North institutions in DC, London, wherever they may be. So we as an organization had to start to change within ourselves, not just being an advocacy leader and founding groups like the NEAR network. NEAR was our first incubation of a nonprofit that has been successful, and they're going to spin off next year. And we have innovated and incubated many things, including now the Proximate Fund. But we started with ourselves because in 2018, we said no more bilateral funding. We're not going to take that kind of money. And in 2020, we made a decision to step away from UN funding. And in 2022, we made a decision to step away from INGO funding. So as you can imagine, the organization kept shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And our funding went down from 27 million to less than 2 million. But that was because we realized that this restrictive top-down approach was not healthy for the communities. It was not driving real impact at the community level, and it was not healthy for us as an organization. And so we had to start the change with ourselves. We can't practice what we're not preaching around decolonizing an institution and really being quite principled in the way we work. So of course, it hasn't been easy, that journey, that transition. It's been extremely painful and it's extremely difficult, but I'm happy to say that with all those difficulties, we've been able to launch and successfully transition the NEAR network, where they will spin off next year. And now we're incubating and launching the Proximate Fund. And the idea of the Proximate Fund is that we need real infrastructure or pipes to move money proximately. We keep saying how it's important, but if we need to recognize that sometimes donors need intermediaries, not all the time. If a donor can give directly, that's the ideal. Give directly to a local organization. But if a donor needs to give through intermediation, instead of it being through a UN agency or an INGO, let's give it through national funds. And the idea is also that Africa is not a country, but a continent. So if we really understand that, then understand that somebody in Nairobi, like me, cannot make decisions about priorities for people in Ethiopia or people in Nigeria. Those decisions about who to fund, what are the priorities, all of that should be done by Nigerians and Ethiopians and not by me sitting in Kenya. And while we are so happy that there are more donor funding collaboratives or funds coming into the continent, the more the merrier. The continent is massive. The needs are high, so we do need all types of different mechanisms available, but we also need to create the infrastructure at the national level. So the Proximate Fund is now piloting in 3 countries, an Anglophone country, a Francophone country, and a humanitarian country. And our research with Bridgespan showed what we knew already, which was that there's donor darling countries where a lot of money goes into, like the Kenya, the Rwandas, the South Africas. And there's very little money that goes into Francophone Africa, and there's very little money that goes into humanitarian conflict countries. And so we wanted to change that, and we wanted to prioritize those groups in our pilot. And for the humanitarian country, we chose Sudan because of the famine. And right now we are actively working on grant making in Sudan while simultaneously establishing a Sudan-led fund that has a board that are made up of Sudanese, that is registered, that has a bank account, that is compliant, and has systems in place to be able to receive funding and disperse funding hopefully by next year, January. So we are actively working on the Sudan fund as our first pilot. And once it spins off or launches, then we can start doing the Francophone country fund pilot and the Anglophone country fund pilot. So that's the idea of the Proximate Fund, is to really decentralize decision-making and recognizing that we need that infrastructure if we're going to see that new ecosystem. And the reality is that, you know, the change that's happening in the space means that the UN is going to change, the INGOs are going to change as a result of donors changing. Overseas development assistance, ODA, that has been fueling not just philanthropy, but the biggest fuel to this engine that is called aid and development architecture has been government bilateral funding, primarily from Western countries, and that is diminishing. It's not just the sledgehammer that Trump took to USAID, but it's also that trend is happening across Europe as well. So if we understand that, we need philanthropy to step up and help us think through what that new ecosystem should look like, and help us to develop that new architecture to be prepared for that, for the reality of what's coming, which is that in 10, 15 years, the system will look dramatically different, whether we like it or not. It's not going to be the same ecosystem that we see now.
Wow, thank you. Wow. I want to underscore your mention of funding, access to funding inequity across the continent, and Francophone Africa is definitely top of mind there for sure. We at Myriad USA in the Africa portfolio are also exploring relationships directly with organizations based in Francophone Africa to ensure that donors have access to these opportunities, access to organizations that are creating impact across the continent. So thank you for underscoring that. And certainly thank you for, again, flagging that the transformation, the dynamics in global philanthropy and the changes are inevitable. And so it's better, it's in all of our best interest to adjust the services, the funding mechanisms to meet those changes. This takes me to my second question. Almaz, would love to bring you in here. What innovations in philanthropy do you see emerging? One, from the diaspora perspective, you're also based in Silicon Valley. They seem to credit themselves as the innovative hub of America. Not sure if that's exactly true, but what innovations do you see emerging in philanthropy, and how would you recommend donors prepare to make a difference in this shifting landscape, particularly when it comes to a fund like the African Diaspora Innovation Fund? Sorry, you're on mute.
I've been very good. Okay, when I mute myself, that means I'm really, really good. I was listening to Digan with all my heart and writing some notes of what she was saying, and that's a much macro level challenge that she's addressing. We're talking on a very micro, in a sense, that looking at what the US, what kind of innovative financing are available.
Mm-hmm.
Let me say a little bit about the culture of Africa. I think it's very critical we forget about this. So I grew up in Eritrea, and I remember as a child, one of the most amazing things that my mother and the neighbors used to do, the woman, think about this. It's called ukub. I think it's called susu in some places. So
Or
philanthropy
tontine in
has been,
other places.
yes,
Yes,
philanthropy
tontine.
has been a part of our life. Why did they do that? So I have this very vivid memory, and then I will bring it back to the United States and everywhere else, how this has really transformed people's life. This is that people put money, I don't know whether it's 10 local dollar, whatever the amount of money that they were putting, but it wasn't about the money, it was about the community. So it will be, this time will be in your home, the next time will be in somebody else's home, whoever wins will host or something like that. At the end of this gathering of the 10 or the 20 women, they get one person will get that funding, that money, but if there is someone who really, really needs it because something happened to their family and there is an urgent matter, you give it. So I will give it to them. And that I want to bring that up because I think sometimes I even myself confuse myself. What am I talking about philanthropy? We've always been philanthropists to each other. We support each other. With innovation didn't start. Innovation actually is, I think, what do they call it? I think poverty and challenge really brings up all kind of innovation. Our communities, wherever they are, they have done this. So I'll bring this back into innovation, back to this United States that we live in. There are some Eritreans that I know in some part of this country who have become extremely successful by doing just what I just said. A bunch of them will put $1,000 or $500 per month into this fund that has made them build houses, do their real estate, pay their own mortgage. There's a lot of great stories that really many can say. And then we have a specific individual, Dr. Jeff, who has actually been looking at this innovative funding, which we call ukub, and he wrote a book called In Their Own Hands. This was something that he did in Mali. Everybody put in money every month, whether it's a quarter or a dollar, but it really, at the end of the day, they all share that money. Why am I bringing this? Because that is based on trust. Trust is key. Without trust, you cannot do anything. So funding is not about, and that's the same thing as investment. You have to trust who you're giving. And then you, as a donor, you want to trust whether this money that you're giving, whether it's to Proximate Fund or to the African Diaspora Innovation Fund, it will be used as it was supposed to be. And that's critical. So where is the innovation? This is already there. So I'm not creating anything. It has been done, and many people have benefited from this kind of micro level convening and getting together. I think where the philanthropy is understanding, and I think Myriad is at the forefront of this, is that now you understand the diaspora must be a part of the conversation on philanthropy. I don't know, Digan, if you remember this at school a couple of years ago, you were speaking, and one of the things I asked was, okay, everybody's talking about all kind of funding. We remit $100 billion per year. I don't care how we put it, this piece together. We are philanthropists to our community. We give money. This is the document. The ones that are not undocumented could be about $200 billion per year. So the foundations are recognizing now, and I think we are even now. I'm speaking tomorrow in Boston or the next couple of days at the philanthropy symposium, including organizations like ADN. It was not a norm. We were not even considered to be a part of any philanthropic conversation. I think that's where you will see innovation coming, finding ways to create a system in which the diaspora can be a part of the conversation. Our funding can be a de-risking factor for investment. We can be a collaborator on a fund. We can create our own donor advised fund, which is what the AfDIF is at Myriad. So there's so many different ways to do, but I think we're not necessarily seeing new innovation. At least I'm not. What I am seeing is what I grew up seeing being used by the diaspora to better themselves. I think that's critical because that's the only way they can find money to start their own business, to go from family to family to raise money. And there's a lot of different ways that people do. this contribution from individual to individual, it's person to person, is already in existence. But I think the big thing that I'm seeing is foundations are paying attention to diaspora, big
Yep.
time. Yeah,
Yep.
and so I am happy about that. I think if there is anything I am seeing, I may not see the whole thing, and it's very difficult because there's so much going on. The fact that the diaspora are now at the table discussing about funding, I think that's a wonderful big movement, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
I love that. For those of us in the diaspora, if you're not familiar with the local terms, tontine, okut, this is really in global philanthropy term, collaborative funds, essentially. That's what Almaz is referring to. And in relation to the African Diaspora Innovation Fund specifically, in fact, the fund has been set up to be just that. Soliciting donations from individual diasporans, $500 a year. If you were to split that, that's roughly $42 a month. Anyone who donates $500 a year has the capacity and the privilege to select the social innovators that are who would be submitted as a potential recipient of your investment. So the future is collaborative. Couldn't agree more, Almaz. Dagan, coming back to you from a continental point of view, what innovations are you seeing? You've been leading a lot of initiatives that are looking at various tools to empower locally led organizations. Again, proximate leadership. What are you seeing, and how do you? What are your recommendations for donors to engage?
Yeah. So I think, one of the things that I completely agree with Almaz is that we need to recognize that we are already funders and philanthropists ourselves, and we don't appreciate that. And this is a very Western kind of notion that philanthropist is only at the high net worth individual area. And it's not just diaspora, but it's local people who donate every single month to pay school fees, to provide health services, to provide whatever, all types of things in the country level. I think every African I know has a list of people that they support. It's very unusual for me to meet an African that doesn't have a list of family members or extended family members that they support. On top of that, when you are a poor person and earning $1, $2 a day, and you give 20 cents of that to a neighbor, I always say that's the biggest philanthropy when you have so little and you give so much. But we don't appreciate that. We only want to appreciate, the billionaires, where giving a few $100 million is not such a big, painful experience to give away that kind of wealth. So I think we just kind of need to reshift our thoughts about what philanthropy is. On the innovation side, as an organization, I honestly, we just do what is right and what the communities need and what we think are solutions to problems that we have encountered. So donors say, oh, we can't find local organizations, or they're too risky. How do we ensure that they can meet the risks and all of that? Then that's how we established Kuja, this tech platform that's trying to help donors address those concerns around risk and all of that, and finding organizations and matching them. And then, in Somalia, for instance, another issue that we saw was that communities in rural communities were left at the mercy of 8 actors to address chronic water crisis, and people were paying exorbitant amounts of money to water truckers. So we decided that we needed to handle this in a sustainable way. And we created a small utility company that drilled boreholes, piped water to people's homes for the first time, put in water meters, cleaned the water through a reverse osmosis plant. All of this infrastructure we created in the first pilot location. And that pilot location is now earning money, and we've been able to reduce the price of water by 86%. And we're the only provider in the entire country that is giving high quality, bottled quality water to people in their taps. This is, to me, it's not innovation, it's just doing what's right, and trying to think about sustainability, because my big thing is I don't want to create something that's always donor dependent. So how do I create something that is financially sustainable? So yes, we reduced price of water by 86%, but now we're generating revenue And that first location is now completely financially independent of grant funding. They're self-sufficient. They don't need any more donor funding. And the next location will do the same and same and same. And so the idea is that now we resolve rural water problems in rural communities and in a sustainable way. And this is through a private sector approach that is a social enterprise. And if we end up making profits at some point in the future, I don't see that happening right now, this minute, but maybe after the 10th location or whatever, we will invest it back into scaling or into the organization. So I think, so all of this is fueled by philanthropy. Yeah. If I came to a bilateral donor and I said, I have this idea of a social enterprise that resolves, rural water crisis and can do X, Y, and Z, bilateral donors would not have been able to provide us the resources. It's seen as too risky, too out of the box, but it's philanthropy that leans into risk, and philanthropy should be the ones that allow us to demonstrate success, whether it's the Proximate Fund or whether it's the water company or whatever. It may be a near network. All the Kuja, all of these things are initially powered by philanthropy. And I think that's the beauty of philanthropy is that changing the behavior of one individual is so much easier, who has wealth, who has been blessed with wealth, is so much easier than changing the machinery of US government or the machinery of the British government or the machinery, So I think that's, to drive innovation, you need that flexible kind of funding. You need that. And for us, because we want to continue doing this, we want to continue being an incubator and innovator of things, we have purposefully said, we need an endowment, a serious $50 million endowment in the next 20 years for ourselves that will allow us to fuel these kinds of things, these new ideas, so that we're not dependent on the generosity of philanthropy alone. Or we can go to a philanthropist and say, let's co-finance this. We have our own money. To me, that is like real liberation. That's real power. When you could go to a donor as a Global South or an African organization and say, I have $1 million, $2 million sitting in the bank, and your money, let's put it together. That's real partnership. We talk about what partnership really means. Partnership ultimately is equality. It's equal decision-making, equal power around these issues. And if you're always the receiver of resources, you're always in, it's not real equitable partnership. So let's just be honest about that. And for me, that liberation is something that we have to do for ourselves. We have to have that vision for ourselves to say, how do we want to become liberated from being dependent on donors? How do we help communities also be liberated from depending on aid?
Oh my goodness, you got me in preacher mode. So I'm going to just try to pretend to be professional for the remaining time that we have. Thank you. Thank you. So I want to move to the conversation around transparency. Almaz, as you know, I know that ADN has been doing this work for decades, for sure. The African Diaspora Innovation Fund is still relatively new. And you and I both know that diaspora generally is a bit skeptical about philanthropy, right? And one can say, rightfully so. International development, global philanthropy has often undermined local voices, local agency, and many people in the diaspora typically conflate philanthropy with charity, which is completely different. So there is an issue of transparency. When you send money, I send remittances to my family in Guinea. Sometimes I don't hear back from people. And so I have issues with transparency. Can you help us understand how the African Diaspora Innovation Fund is thinking about transparency, structuring it in the way, though, that is locally relevant and has nuances so that donors are not creating additional burdens for people that are implementing program, but also deserve to know what is the impact of their money, right? Like, can you tell us more about how you're creating that transparency? Unmute.
Unmuted. Okay. I am going to respond to your question, but first let me pick up on what Digan mentioned. I think this is very important. I hope everyone is listening to this, and we need to write about this. We need to speak about this wherever we go. What is our vision for ourselves and our community? Do we want to depend on other people to do the things that we can do for ourselves? Or do we want to really create a system in which we actually have a say in it? If you're not putting yourself at the table or your money in the pocket, you don't have any say because you're still depending for other people to make the decision on your behalf. I think we need to get away from the sense of we need someone to do this for us. Nobody is going to do this for us. I'm sorry. We have to do this ourselves. The question is, which then goes to what you were saying, we need to somehow step back a little bit and say two things. Yes, we are very skeptical as diasporans. Trust becomes a big, massive issue for us. And I don't blame our community because we've been beaten up by many things from the countries where we come from to the communities what we have experienced. Experience really just brings all kind of baggage in itself or some opportunities in itself. So I am a very worst person in that sense because I actually just trust people will do what they say they're doing. And that's been wonderful for me. I mean, you get disappointed, but that's the price you pay for taking things at face value. But it is the best price to take because then you start to remove all the other assumption that you have about this and that, because that's such a heavy negative energy that I really don't have time for. What I have time for is for what you just said. In order for us at ADN, you've seen what we've gone through. The board was extremely involved on this because they have fiduciary responsibility on ADN. So I don't really do much anything at ADN that requires transparency without involving the board, especially money. And so our board has been very, very clear from the beginning. We have two board members, two of our board members, a part of the chairman and then one other board member, a part of the development of the African Diaspora Innovation Fund. We drove Myriad crazy because we wanted to get more clarity on this, clarity on that. So what we did was to create that clarity and that responsibility. We put everything on the website. So the African, if anyone of your team can share with them, because I believe this doesn't go through.
It's been shared actually, yeah.
Okay, perfect. So the African Diaspora Innovation Fund, if you can take a look at this, it tells you why we developed it, which is really, really to support. I'm going to be frank to our own entrepreneurs, because ADN has two accelerator program, as I mentioned earlier. I believe, and I've always believed this even before we developed this, the fund. Why is it that we, the diaspora, cannot come together to give $25,000 to each of our entrepreneurs? They're about 10 to 15 at times, depending. So our goal is to give it to our entrepreneurs. And of course, they have to go through the selection process. We already have a committee. You can take a look at our committee. We're not really doing this on our own. There is a committee that we came up with the best of committee members. I'm so grateful to each and every one of them for saying yes. It's a new fund. We just started it, and I am not worried about when we will raise the money that we're trying to raise. But I think the question of why did we develop, all of it is on the website. Why we developed it? It's because really we wanted to support the entrepreneurs. How it's done, it's all there. So your funding, 90% of the money that we raise from this fund will go to the entrepreneurs. The 10% is, of course, the admin. You know, ADN doesn't do a lot of pass-through, but we do give money to our entrepreneurs. We have one funder who gives $200,000 per year for the Accelerating Business Leadership and Entrepreneurship. That if you finish that entire program, for those who finish the entire program, they each get $10,000. We're not only training them, we're also giving, there's also a funder who gives them money. This is not the Builders of Africa's Future. It's the other one, the local, the US based. So the pass through, we get a percentage. You know what is the admin cost? This is the same thing. That's the only thing that will come to support what Myriad is doing and what ADN is doing. And so we split this 5%. 5% is almost nothing, honestly. But I am saying this, that's the transparent in which we adhere to the protocol, to the responsibilities that we have. And it's also donor advised fund. So by the time that you give your money, I believe, Patty, 500 is and more is what we said people will have an opportunity to speak. And those who have already given us, I thank each one of you. They were all 500 or above. And thank you to all who gave. I encourage all of you to really take a look at that page. Take a look at if we are missing anything, let us know. But ADN one thing you can be clear about, ADN, is that the money that we get, even if it's a penny, my team knows this. If we're given the money to do a specific thing, we must do it because it is the trust that we have between our funder and ourselves. In this case, it will be the diaspora funding. And so your penny will go into use, but it is for transparency. All of the stuff, the entire governance is on our website, so they can take a look at that. I hope this helps.
Yeah, no, it's definitely there, and we'll be happy to address any additional questions that might come up. Digan, transparency, I think it's even more challenging in your context, given that some of the proximity local funds that you work, proximity-based local funds that you work with sometimes don't even have access to internet, sometimes don't have systems set up. Yet ADESO has been instrumental in reporting its investment to its donors, letting everybody know about challenges. Help us understand how you are addressing the transparency issue through the Proximate Fund as well.
So just to say that, you know, we have had, as an organization operating in Somalia and initially pioneering cash in 2003, we have had this history of having to convince the world that cash was the right thing to do. And so what we ended up doing with cash is we developed a rigorous training manual that we ended up, with the support of USAID and EU, training a bunch of international global north institutions like Mercy Corps, like Oxfam and UNICEF and all of that, and governments and local NGOs and all of that in the continent. We also developed a lot of tools on accountability, like how do you register each household. We developed a post-distribution monitoring survey. So we would survey the beneficiaries immediately after a distribution to ask them, did you receive the money? How much did you receive? Blah, blah, blah. We would do external evaluations for each of the projects. So all of this, plus the audits at the end, all of this really helped to demonstrate the efficacy of cash and the confidence that the global community and donors had. And this is how cash scaled. Cash actually scaled from the experience of Somalia, and that experience was heavily a lot of the learning from ADESO. So, you know, in a very complex, you know, humanitarian context like Somalia, where there is an active conflict in some parts and all of that. So for the Proximate Fund, what we, so again, this is all in the initial stages, in the design stage, but a few things. One, we have Myriad as a fiscal sponsor. We have the capacity to be the fiscal sponsor because we are the fiscal sponsor and incubator of Near Network, but we didn't want to take that responsibility on ourselves, honestly. We just felt like we needed to have, for something like this at the scale that we envisioned this fund to be, we wanted to have a different kind of mechanism to hold, you know, for accountability and all of that. So that was the first step. And then the second thing is that each national fund will have a board, a governance structure. And that board will be made up people in the diaspora, people in the private sector, people in maybe in civil society and all of that. And so it's a mixed board. It's not meant to be just pure civil society. Of course, civil society will have its members in that board, but it's meant to be a diverse board because this fund is not meant to just fund at the civil society level. That's one significant part of it, but it's also meant to fund social entrepreneurs and maybe even some small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And so we'll have a diverse governance structure. And then another layer is that we will be doing a lot to track impact and collect impact data with the recipients, the grantees, and doing some external evaluations of the work that we have done as soon as the grantees have received their funding. So we'll probably do maybe some twice a year reviews done, maybe one internally and one externally with an external consultant, like an evaluation of the work. And then the last thing in terms of like accountability systems that we are building, we're heavily relying on and developing that right now, designing it right now is what is the requirements that grantees have to submit? What kind of due diligence are we going to do on the grantees? What is the minimal acceptable thing? keep in mind, the Proximate Fund is also supposed to be a trust-based philanthropy model, right? And if we really, really are walking under those ethos of trust-based philanthropy, we cannot have back office due diligence systems that model USAID due diligence or FCDO due diligence, right? And secondly, we're also working with non-informal, non-registered groups. So in Sudan, for instance, for many of you guys might know already, what we have is the emergency response rooms, or some people call mutual aid groups. These are activists that were marching on the streets, and then they became humanitarian actors by accident, not by design. And they started running food kitchens in their neighborhoods. They started doing humanitarian response. These groups don't want to be registered. They don't want to be formalized. They don't want that. They're activists, and they want to stay, and they see their role as temporary, running these humanitarian projects. And a lot of the projects, a lot of the humanitarian response in the country right now, especially in inaccessible areas where there's a lot of fighting and conflict, are being run by the ERRs, the emergency response rooms. And so donors had to struggle. It took them time to figure out how to fund an organization that doesn't have 3-year audit reports. But I'm happy to say there has been already a precedent set, with USAID agreeing before it collapsed, having put some money into these mutual aid groups. Other foundations had put money into these mutual aid groups. There was a whole mutual aid Sudan funding movement that started at CGI, led by Center for Disaster Philanthropy, and other funders like VTOL and others got involved. So there has been more and more acceptance of this idea of funding informal, non-registered groups. And that has been really helpful, but we want to support them. And we also want to support more formalized groups, but also social entrepreneurs and even some small businesses as well. So we will have a diverse portfolio of grantees that we give resources to. But we are developing, and we have a lot of things that have been developed by Near Network, which already established a change fund for 2 years with the support of Hilton, that has been extremely successful. So a lot of the due diligence and grant making mechanisms that they've been using is what we're also going to heavily rely on.
Yeah. Okay, very quickly, we're almost at time. But I do have one good question for both of you. 1 minute each. Almaz, what's the fundraising goal for the African Diaspora Innovation Fund? Please let us know what the fundraising goal is.
By the end of 2026, we would like to see $2 million in that fund. This is really, really doable. We don't think this is impossible. But before the end of this year, in order for us to get there, we definitely need, this is not going to come only, as you know, it's not going to come only from each one of us. We just wanted to go to institutional funders and say, we've raised $50,000. So our goal for the next few months is really to raise, before the end of the year, $50,000. And we're going to use that to leverage that, to raise that $6 million that we're thinking about.
Okay. Dagan?
Yeah, so the Proximate Fund wants to pilot, is piloting in 3 countries, establishing national funds in 3 countries, and each of the 3 countries will be doing grant making to community leaders in their own countries. And so our goal for the 3 countries was to raise $15 million. We have already raised $8 million of that. So we hope to raise another $7 million to fund the pilot for these 3 countries. I think that's definitely doable, and we're quite optimistic that we will hopefully hit our target.
Amazing. All right, onward and upward. Thank you both so much for your insights, leaderships, and for definitely driving the conversation forward, despite all the challenges that we all know is happening currently in global philanthropy. I see a lot of nice comments for both of you in the chat. Thank you for inspiring everybody, including me. There is one question that I do want to ask, though, which I think is important. The question is for both of you, and it's asking, what stereotypes do you have to dispel when you're having a conversation with donors? What, Almaz, with you, lots of stereotypes in the diaspora philanthropy space. What do you have to dispel when you're talking to both diaspora donors, but also Friends of Africa donors?
Well, this is a tough time for fundraising. I don't know how else to say this. It's been very difficult, not because people don't want to give, but there's a lot of restriction that has come on a macro level. And so what do we dispel? I am going to continue to speak about the role of the diaspora. I see foundations are not going to give us unless there is also something in it for them. So tapping into the diaspora is not just for one or the other. It really is for all of us. And when we talk about diaspora, I would like everyone to think about the global diaspora. We're talking about the Indian diaspora, the Irish diaspora. Talk about the Irish diaspora. I can go on and speak to you about what they have done to create a country that it is today. India in 1990 wasn't what it is today. The diaspora stepped in to make something happen. And so the diaspora, wherever we go, we are incredible. The African diaspora is amazing. I'm going to just shout out in terms of, because of its the number of people. Nigeria, they remit $20 to $22 billion per year into their country. Foreign direct investment has always been way lower than anyone can imagine. It's less than $1 billion. So the diaspora plays a big role. Where we would love to see is that the foundations to understand what role can we play to become a part of that bigger philanthropic conversation, whether it's the collective efforts, that the collaborative funding that's coming through a lot of amazing foundations. Can the diaspora be a part of it? What does it look like? I don't know, but I'm going to continue to speak about that to the funders, and they can take a look at us and see if we can become a part of this bigger tent as an equal player. I think this is very important so that we don't become a side note.
Digan, what do you dispel when you're talking to donors? Stereotypes. That's all. You have a long list, I'm sure.
I think we have a lot of work to do as Africans ourselves to get to the point where we just also kind of understand our agency and our capacity to do for ourselves what, rather than expecting others to do for us. So there is a level of changing mentality that has to be done by ourselves. So if you look at ourselves as our own first donors, so I would say that's one thing that we have to change first, before asking donors to change as well.
Yes.
But I would also say there's some double standards that we have in this space, and how global North organizations are treated, and how global South organizations, particularly African-led organizations, are treated. Those are the kinds of issues that I would like to have dispelled. So constantly asking yourself, if this organization was led by a white man, would you have the same kind of questions and concerns and issues as you do with just stop and pause and say, if a different person was kind of leading this institution, because we've seen, all types of problems, and everybody has problems, everybody has issues, but I think I would like people to have to give local organizations, whether they're in Asia, Latin America, the grace that they give white-led organizations.
Yeah. Wow.
Can I say something about Digan?
Sure,
and
quick,
I also
yes.
Adesso, it's she's not just talking, she's doing. Yeah. So I'll tell you, and this is very important, because I think one of the things that we don't do as much as we should, including myself and all of us, we don't really necessarily tell the whole story. So in 2025, we lost a lot of funding that was supposed to come from government that has really been a backbone of AfDIF, as you know, the symposium. So when I reached out to Adesso, the first thing we got was, yes, let's collaborate, let's do this, and let's find ways to support this event that brings our community together. At the end of the day, it's about engagement, coming together as a community, not only to just speak about the issues that we curate, but it's also about all the different things that each organization is doing. So Proximate Fund, as if you remember, we had Megan from Adesso speak at the symposium. Why I am saying this is that Digan, I know you've gone through a lot more than I can ever imagine myself in terms of the funding, and your organization might be bigger than ADN. We really, really look at the diaspora to become a part of this journey, and I am grateful to the diaspora who supports ADN and are a part of the conversation. The work goes on, but I also think that we really need to step back and start to take a look at ourselves and say, okay, there are many of us, including yourself, doing what you can to support others. And ADN does the same thing. And we should continue to do this as we move forward, because then we go into that first thing that you've said. We need to find ways to rely on ourselves and each other. Yes, we can always use help, and nobody does everything on their own. But for God's sake, let's also show that we do have the agency, the capacity, the will, the commitment to do things. I have seen it, and I think I will continue to use that as my North Star. And I'm proud of our community and all our funders and the Friends of Africa, the Africans, and all of the people that we care about. So I think we have a long way to go, but I wanted to shout out to you, Kadi, for your generosity of spirit, deed, and then Digan, for continue to advocate for what you believe in. When you mentioned to me, oh, you wanted to get $1 billion fund, and I just say, why don't you just say you want $1 billion fund? Why can't she say that she wants $1 billion fund? We had a very beautiful conversation last year. I want to see you get that $1 billion, and it starts today. So
Wow.
really, yeah,
Well,
she did. She does want that. So I think it's not,
you.
we shouldn't be limited. The amount of money that we want to ask, we should not be limited. Yes, of course, it depends on what you're going to do, but she has huge vision. And it does require a lot of money to make these things happen. And so do we, to support our entrepreneurs. So I think we should put this out to the community, that we're not just asking, we're also stepping up ourselves into this.
Well, that is a wonderful place to end. Thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists, Dagan and Almaz, for leading this discussion. I know it's a much more complicated, nuanced conversation. This is just a beginning. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all for attending. Just be on the lookout for our next webinar series from my colleagues. And also, again, thank you once more for being here, for following us. And feel free to follow Myriad USA on LinkedIn, and also sign up for our newsletter for future events so that we can keep you informed of the innovations and opportunities that we see in this space. Once again, thank you, everybody. This has been wonderful. Almaz, Dagan, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thank you.